Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming back to Shaman's Way. Thank you for my constant listeners. I love your presence in my thoughts as I wonder about what to create for the next podcast. To the new listeners, thank you for sharing your time with me, and for those all in between, welcome, and let's go on a mental meandering and figure out a few things together. This one I'm referring to as don't get stuck. So don't get stuck. I think that having experience that has lasted many years and having many different journey experiences over the years, I have come to have a good relationship to the terrain in which I travel. And I know that there are many of us who are listening who also have a long-term practice of some form or other, and you, I'm sure, can resonate or find resonance within the words that I speak about don't get stuck. So I want to share some of the personal things that I've gone through in journeys over the years. When I first started on the path, I started in the upper world. Well, I didn't start in the upper world, but I met a wonderful being named Iushanu, and he was always in the upper world and greeting me. The way that I would travel in the upper world is I would step into the campfire that is in my anchor spot. I've talked about the anchor spot a number of times over the podcasts. And as I stepped into the fire, I would go up, traveling up through the spirit world on the smoke. One of the imperative ways of telling whether or not you've gone between the worlds is by passing through a layer. And for those of us who still practice that way, I do feel like I'm moving through a layer or breaking through a threshold or a barrier. For the first number of years, I would jump through what looked like I'm sure most of us have left pudding or something of that consistency in a fridge without a cover on, and maybe you've even left it for more than a day. Maybe you've left it for several days. However, that crusty top that cracks and it kind of gets shakes and gets really thick, that's what I would have to break through in the upper world. And as soon as I broke through, I would land on solid clouds, and the spirit which greeted me was always a Iushanu. The sky was always black with stars. It wasn't a place where the sun shone. And Iushanu was my guide and very instrumental in opening up my emotional self when I first started to practice. I came from, I was still a very young woman, and I had very, very young children, and I was just beginning on my path. And it was with hindsight and with the backward-looking glance that I realized the relationship and the role of Iushanu. It allowed me, this relationship, it allowed me the opportunity to open my heart and to open my body and open my soul to the experiences of the upper world, to the upper dimensions, to the higher planes, to the different places. And traveling through the skyscape the stars, landing on different planets, known or unknown, and having a guide that I loved very dearly in the spirit world was a gift to me of safety, security, and mentorship, a teacher, and an intimate, a very, very intimate relationship, emotionally, spiritually, etc., etc. The relationship with the Ushanu continued for a number of years. And I remember that we had been a number of years because when I first met him, I was in the basement of a minimum security prison called Stan Daniel Center. And that is where I first discovered shamanic drumming circle. It was quite an amazing energy, actually. It wasn't scary at all. It had been an RCMP barracks prior to that. And then before that, it had been a coal mining center. So that basement had been well used and well loved under the soil of that particular area. From there, we outgrew that, or I can't remember what exactly happened. We ended up in the attic of a very old school, again, Canadian old. So my listeners from other parts of the world that haven't destroyed or are old enough to have older buildings, old in my language, in my relationship to Edmonton, where I grew up, is 100 years. I don't know how old the Norwood School is, but it does stand. It's a wooden structure. It's a very lovely, huge school. And we moved from the Stan Daniel Center to the upper world, so an attic. It was an amazing experience. It was a kids' library up there. The energy was just beautiful and peaceful. Whichever spirit lived in that school was a very calming presence, had a very strong, positive presence. And I think that Norwood School, being in the inner city, being in one of the most poor parts of the inner city, we all can turn our imagination or memories of what it was like or what it could be like to be in that school. We then moved down to the gym because we had outgrown the attic, and we moved into the gym. And at that point in time, I'd been going to the circle for over 3 years, and I still had a beautiful relationship with Ushanu. Still a strong teacher. And it was during this time that we were in that particular gym, that one of the journeys, I went into the upper world and Ushanu was gone. And he had left me, and I was bereaved and bereft, and the pain and the agony of my broken heart in the spirit world was clearly felt in the physical world. The relationship was not bound by the threshold of that place and this place, or the sacred and the mundane. The relationship of heart and relationship of spirit is as real as physical as it is etherical and spiritual. The heartbreak was so real. I remember going into a depression, and there had been, obviously conversations that we had had and gifts that we had exchanged with each other. And I felt very betrayed. So don't get stuck in thinking that you have a relationship with a spirit and that spirit is always going to be there. I had assumed that Ushanu was always going to be there, and I did run into him a number of years later, and I had the opportunity to question and ask specifically why or where he went. And that information I don't necessarily need to share with you, but it is possible to have a different kind of closure. It just may take some time. And my relationship with Ushanu, the closure part of it, did really quite take some time. I had another very, very potent teacher, my grandmother, And I often talk about my grandmother when I speak about the lessons that I've learned, what my grandmother taught me, what my grandmother showed me. This is the grandmother that I refer to, and she greeted me for many years in the spirit world, in the lower world. And the lower world held many different types of dangers and many different types of situations that I know from my years of experience, very few have a relationship similar to this. So I think that most people have very peaceful journeys, is what I'm trying to say. My grandmother cooked very, very great smelling food. I, however, was never allowed to eat it, which I thought was really unfair. And yet I would, there would be other people in the cabin and she would allow them to eat. But she used very beautiful wooden bowls and wooden spoons. And there was a great fireplace which had the tripod and the cooking kettle inside the fire, and she had it was an entire section of this cabin was devoted to herbs and to mixing of herbs and the creation of medicines, and in another corner was a bed where she often would tend the wounded of the spirit world, or whatever guise that spirit world sent, whether it was an animal, another spirit, a human being looking spirit. There were any myriad of beings in that cabin at any point in time. And it was from the front of my grandmother's cabin that I leapt into the different places of the lower world. So this was my threshold. This was, in hindsight, this was that anchor place. And instead of it being in the middle world, this was my anchor place, or a place where I came back to during particularly great journeys and particularly bad journeys, and journeys where I almost lost my life to journeys that changed my life. And grandmother was always there. She provided me with, and I have no other word but servant, and she provided me with a servant who was blinded. And after all of my battles, I was not allowed to clean my own knives, my own swords. It still stands to this day. And the servant takes everything and washes everything. I don't know what the process the servant goes through to clean my weapons. I only know that when I enter into the spirit world the next time, they're all cleaned and sharpened, and the nicks that I may have caused by hitting something quite hard are often fixed, and I don't notice any imperfections. They've changed and grown my weapons over the years. My body armor has shifted and grown and changed. So don't get stuck into thinking that what you have for gifts in one world will always be there. But back to my grandmother, and not so much the relationship of the servant and the weapons. Grandmother was not a very kind spirit. She was very short-tempered. She did not suffer fools gladly. And there was a certain level of physical demonstrations of frustration, but I never feared her. I did never want to disappoint her, but I didn't ever fear her. And I grew so much in my own self and in my own soul and my strength. And this is when I was traveling south on the medicine wheel. And when I've talked about the south on the medicine wheel before, and I've discussed my relationship to the warrior, my relationship to movement. And then, as occurred one day, I went into the spirit world, went into the lower world, and grandmother was gone. And the only thing left was one of her aprons. And I could have use of anything in the cabin, and the cabin was well stocked. I filled up my medicine pouch, and I went back maybe 2 or 3 times, and there was no drive for me to continue to stay there. So I learned many different ways of entering of the threshold from this place to that place, or one level of the lower world into another aspect of the lower world. Losing a grandmother, when I had in this lifetime one of my grandmothers, I had a very loving and very kind relationship, and she was a really beautiful soul. The opposite, the antithesis, perhaps, of my grandmother, therefore appeared in the spirit world. But I suffered her loss no less than I suffered the loss of my kind grandmother. And I again felt abandoned, and I again was not given closure. She was gone. I did run into her several years later, much like I had ran into Yushinu. And there was a place in the spirit world where her medicine and her knowledge was needed more than my area of the spirit world, and myself in particular needed her medicine and her lessons and her tinctures. I take with me forever the lessons and the teachings of grandmother. I have mourned her loss. However, I have moved on, as all of us move on. My very first power animal, I've talked about the shape-shifting white deer / goat / I don't really quite know what you are, spirit that first came with me when I entered into the spirit world, really very slowly and very gradually drifted out of my sphere as I moved east of the medicine wheel. And I didn't spend very long in the eastern part of the medicine wheel, so I suspect I'll be in the eastern part of the wheel again before I pass from this plane to another plane. Or maybe not, I don't know. However, I digress. The power animal was there was not a great deal of sorrow. It was more of, you don't see this friend. But this power animal taught me one of the most potent lessons I have ever received. I was journeying from my grandmother's cabin. She was still with me in those days. And I journeyed into a part of the lower world that I knew absolutely nothing about, and I was sent on an errand to a place I never heard of before called the Land of the Dead, a place which now I am very familiar with. However, my first encounter certainly was one that was wrought with sorrow, with terror, with fixation on being kept in the spirit world by beings other than myself, and myself really wanting to get out, knowing that if I didn't get out, then my life would be, I don't know what my life would be, but I assume it would be over in the physical world. However, I digress. This power animal, we were jumping a chasm, and this animal could leap most beautifully and bound. And I took a run at it, and we both leapt at the same time, and I barely made it across, and my power animal did not make it across. And I mourned. I felt so bad. There was a chasm that was over 1,000 feet deep, and I couldn't travel down there in order to travel through to the Land of the Dead to continue on with the journey that I was supposed to carry on with. So I didn't that evening retrieve my power animal, but what I did do was I sought counsel from people who were attached to a group of serious practitioners. And this is very early on in the internet, my relationship with the internet. So someone suggested that I wasn't sure, how do I get this spirit back? What do I do? And I journeyed again. I believe it was the next day or within 2 days. And I journeyed into the sky and I begged the Sky Nation and the stars to build me a web and to build me a net and to travel down into the chasm with me. And I was lowered into the bottom of the chasm by the netting provided by the stars and by the energy of the night sky. And I found her there and I put her into the webbing, and the webbing magically lifted itself up to create, a beautiful, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a sling, and lifted us up onto the right side of the chasm so we could travel to the grandmother's cabin and so on and so forth. The lesson that I learned was you never leave a power animal behind, and you do whatever it is you have to do in order to get your power animal back. It's a test. And it's a test as to whether or not you're dedicated, whether or not I could be trusted to be given XYZ or be taken XYZ. And I felt such relief in rescuing her, even though spirits can't die. And I know that she would have been fine in hindsight. But I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't well versed in theosophy, well versed in philosophy, well versed in so on and so forth, even shamanism. So that was a very strong and potent lesson for me. And since then, I have never left a power animal behind. I've never left a spirit behind, and it has. Well, not often, but it has caused me hardship, shall we say, and challenges and dangers. However, they have also, that relationship that I've built with my power animals over the years is a relationship of trust and mutual respect, and very powerful. So don't get stuck in thinking that your relationship to the spirit world is really one-sided. You have a duty, so to speak, to also take care and keep up your end of the bargain with respect to the power animals that you work with. And it is important that you're cognizant, that you practice awareness, so you will know when your spirit your power animal are in danger and really require your assistance. The last one I wish to share is a very hard lesson for me. I have had a lion with me for years, and we met in the south of the medicine wheel and taught me so much about how to move, how to be a fighter, how to be a strong person, how to wait. The lion taught me the patience of the warrior. Lion taught me to be patient as a warrior, and that in order to be an old warrior, you had to know when you could fight and when it wasn't wise to fight. And Lion grew over the years. He was my very first tattoo, and I had wanted a tattoo for like 20 years, but it was very important for me to make sure that the first tattoo I had was a tattoo I wanted and would want forever. And I didn't really like the colors of it, and I won't go into the long story because it's a long story. But anyway, And I journeyed that night after the tattoo to Lion, and I said to Lion, I didn't really like the colors, and the Lion appeared to me in the colors of my tattoo and looked at me and said, well, no, it's not about you, it's about me, and I love my colors. And over time, Lion grew to where his head was in between my elbow and my shoulder, to the point where my head the top of my head is at his shoulder. So he has grown substantially over the years, and our relationship has deepened. My trust of Lion is implicit. My trust of his spirit is implicit. I respect, admire, and feel honored to walk with Lion. Over the years, Lion has sustained some very interesting wounds, which have left some very interesting scars. His mane has changed color with the wisdom that he has acquired and shown. He has grown up the same as I have grown up, and he has shifted the same as I have shifted. The difference is that he is a being of formlessness, a being of the breath of life, a being of the spirit, and so therefore came to our relationship with a wisdom I certainly did not have, and with a knowledge I certainly did not have. However, as he imparted the wisdom and imparted the lessons, he too grew. He too grew in his watchfulness, his ability to pad beside me, his ability to run off and to be able to do what his journey was in the spirit world, and meet me back partway through the journey, and we both would share what we had encountered up until that point in time. So in many ways we were, for lack of a better term, we were hunting partners. And the tracking and the tracing, he very rarely did we go into bushes together. So he taught me a lot about how to track in the open and how to stay invisible in the open, and how to move silently, how to move with grace and ease, and how to walk with absolute power. And then on Saturday, this past Saturday, which I don't know when you'll be listening to this, so a few Saturdays ago, I was tracking a particularly challenging father, and he was a runner. So I had to go to a plains, like a savanna plains, and I climbed a high tree and saw him running far off in the distance. And I yelled, "Get him!" And then I realized that two other spirit kin that I'd never worked with before went bolting out from underneath the tree to do my bidding. And Lion was standing beside the tree and started to walk away. I got down out of the tree and I ran to Lion, and Lion left me. And we had a discussion, we talked, and I openly wept during my journey for a soul retrieval for someone that I was doing. I was doing a soul retrieval at the time, and I was and am devastated by the loss of Lion. And although I know that I will build a good relationship with the spirit kin that have shown up on the savannah for me, there is nothing like Lion. There was never a spirit in my life or a companion in my life as steadfast and true as Lion. So don't get stuck. Don't get stuck in believing that everything you have with you is going to stay with you. And don't get stuck in the thought that perhaps you will never be as powerful or as potent as you can be. Don't get stuck in the limitations of what you think is. Instead, expand to what could be. Don't get stuck in the smallness of your relationship to the spirit world. Instead, embrace the never-ending, always shifting, always moving boundaries of the spirit world. Push yourself, push yourself, push yourself. Don't get stuck in relationship loss. As in the physical world, we are shifted, we are challenged, we are moved, we are embraced, we are rejected, and we outgrow our teachers. We outgrow how Spirit presented itself to us. Spirit presents itself in forms that we will gravitate to, we will understand, we will remember, however that is. How we are in the spirit world must change. As I've said before, the hero, all of us, we can never return the same way we left. We can never be who we were before. We can only ever be who we are right now. Expect change. Embrace change if you can. Process change. Write it out. Draw it out. Paint it out. Sing it out. Dance it out. Drum it out. Express shifts. Express changes. We must bring the unconscious conscious. We bring ourselves from one place to another place. So don't get stuck where you are, because the spirit world never gets stuck where it is. It's constantly shifting. It's constantly changing, regardless of our emotional relationship with it. I hope you enjoyed this particular chat. And thank you for giving me your ears and your minds. And I encourage you to enjoy everything as it is, mourn as you need to, grieve as you need to, celebrate as you need to, ceremony as you need to, ritual as you need to, but above all, honor yourself in whatever manner that Spirit requests of you. Honor yourself, even if Spirit requests silence and stillness. Until next time.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.